afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our discussion on race relations in the United States. This discussion will be sponsored by Sisters in Spirit. Sisters in Spirit is a nonprofit organization headquartered in Chesapeake, Virginia. Sisters in Spirit is a charitable organization which seeks to enrich the lives of women and empower them to enrich the lives of others. My name is Annette Mizell Moody. I will be hosting the discussion today. I am the founder and president of Sisters in Spirit. But how does it make you feel when you hear Black Lives Matter? Leanne.
Initially for me, I feel compassionate. I feel that I don't get offended by it. I know so many do. They think that it's just saying only one race matters, but to me personally, I have compassion for any one person or any group that may be hurting. And so to me, that's how I perceive it, as maybe somebody is hurting or they need me to walk beside them through what they're dealing with.
For me personally, I feel like it's a declaration of worth, of value of Black lives. I know it is offensive to some, but when I hear it as, for some people use it as a cry for validation. You know, please hear us, please hear our pain, please hear our stories, see what we're saying. And for others, it's more of a declaration, a proclamation of the value of every human life. Because I don't think all lives matters will be true until all Black lives matter as well.
So, okay. You shaking your head, Rosemary. What does that mean?
Yes. No, it's good to hear different perspectives, and it's refreshing, because I personally would like to understand how the movement has evolved. I know it started with Trayvon Martin and what happened when he was shot by George Zimmerman, but I'm questioning whether it's more of a civil rights movement, or it's more, I feel like sometimes it's been influenced heavily by politics. So for a lot of people, they sometimes question what the real motive and the intentions are. I'm just being honest about why some people have resistance towards it, or they find it offensive because they question the motivation. Is it just political? And a lot of people don't understand, like, okay, well, why is it just Black Lives Matter? Why is it offensive or considered racist to say all lives matter? Like, people, honestly, they don't mean to be disrespectful when they ask that. They want to understand that.
Why does it have to be inclusive and say all lives matter if one particular area, one particular race is suffering?
If Black Lives Matter, we wouldn't need a civil rights movement in this country. If Black Lives Matter, if we want to be straight about it, there wouldn't have been slavery. So you've got to look at the root of the Black life and the systematic racism that takes place. But the issue here is Black Lives Matter because they haven't mattered. And I'm going to take it back again. It started with slavery. We had to fight for slavery. This country had to fight to free the slaves, okay? Because they wanted to keep slavery, right? Okay. 2, we had to fight for equal rights, for civil rights, to be treated and have equal rights. We are still fighting for that. So the Black Lives Matter, yes. Is it a political movement? Yes, it is, because we're still fighting.
Right.
Okay, Rosemary, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I don't want to hog up, the time, but yeah, I guess my only question would be, like, for example, when someone like the off-duty police officer, Black police officer, 77 years old, was murdered by a looter protecting a property, I don't feel like there is as big of an outrage. Forgive me if I'm wrong. This is just what I'm perceiving. It just doesn't seem like there's as big of an outrage. He's Black, doesn't his life matter too, just as much? I just, you know, I need to understand this. I need to understand why there is a difference. And it seems like there's a selective approach as to which Black life matters. This is the interpretation that a lot of people are getting, and I personally get that same interpretation. Forgive me if I'm wrong. I don't mean to be offensive. I want to learn.
So that's why we're here today. We're here to have that discussion. We're here to talk about those things that no one's talked about. Let me go to Tiffany first, Yvette, and then I'll come to you. Go ahead, Tiffany.
So I don't know. I don't want to get into that whole, well, you're not complaining about this, you're complaining about that, you're not complaining about this person. Really and truly, every life is of equal value. We all are made in the image of God and have
Yes, we are.
image in us, and they are all worthy of value and love and respect and acceptance.
But if we look back in history, like Tina said, this has been happening for so long. I understand a police officer, when a police officer dies in the line of duty, it's kind of like that's their job, so to speak. So they know that there's a chance that they can die. They signed up for that. But someone that's just in their home, you know, drinking coffee and gets killed, that's kind of different. But for people that aren't doing anything, black people that aren't doing anything and that are killed, that is an issue, and it's been happening for so long. I mean, you can go back to the 1819, you know, it's been happening for so long. So as we have all these bodies piling up, yes, we understand this police officer got killed. We feel bad. Police officers do get killed in the line of duty. That's their job. We're not saying that their lives don't matter, because it does. It's unfair. It's not right. But for people that aren't doing anything and happen to be African American and are repeatedly murdered for no reason, that's the issue that plays in and that scares us.
Perhaps it's because I'm a leftover. I'm probably older than all of you guys, and I'm a leftover child of the 60s and 70s. And it's just so clear to me when the Black Lives Matter thing started that it's so overdue. It was like, finally, people are coming together and speaking out, and obviously not everybody. But maybe I was thinking in the last few days about history classes that I had taken, and I grew up in a time when things you didn't have to be careful of children's feelings, and I'm not saying that's all bad, but I feel like I also grew up in integrated schools. We had good exposure to history, and I just can't imagine. I don't know. I have trouble imagining why people don't get why Black Lives Matter is so important. White lives have mattered for always in this country, and saying Black Lives Matter and coming together as a movement, and I consider myself a part of that. I hope on the fringes, at least a protector. I can't imagine. I'm not good at putting myself in other people's places who don't get that, quite honestly. That's a fault of mine, because then I don't engage with people sometimes who don't get it.
I'll share something with you guys, if I may, Marie. This was probably maybe a year or so ago, and I don't even think we were talking about anything in particular. And Marie just looked at me and she said, I don't envy you in your position that you have two boys, Black boys to raise in the United States. And I can tell you, I'm not ever really at a loss of words. And I was at a loss of words for a second, because I just thought, whoa. And I said to her, I said, you are the first person who looks like you that has ever said anything like that to me. And I just, because I was like, she gets it. Because I'll have conversations with my boys and Tiffany and with our children that white people won't have to have with their children. My oldest is about to start driving, okay? And I tell him this, and he's heard this since he was probably 5 years old. But I tell him, if you're ever pulled over by a police officer, you put your hands on the steering wheel where he can see them or she can see them. You don't move. You say, yes, ma'am, sir. If they ask you for your driver's license, you ask them for permission to get it. Permission to go in my pocket to get my driver's license. Permission to reach into my glove compartment to get the item that you have just requested from me. So I have to drill that into them so that they know that you don't make any sudden movements, because my hashtag is being Black is not a crime. Why are Black people looked upon as criminals or dangerous?
It's
Tiffany.
Yeah,
painful.
even by the side of the road, see people pulled over who are not, who pulled over and being given tests and being thrown around and handcuffed. I've lived in inner cities too. And white privilege keeps an awful lot of white people out of that particular situation. It's almost always Black people.
For the record, Annette, what you told your son as far as how to conduct himself during a car stop, I told my son the same exact thing. Because that is the proper way to handle yourself. Because let's think about it. Law enforcement puts their lives on the line to serve and protect the community, the innocent people, in the inner cities, in the suburbs, everywhere. So you want them to feel safe. When I get pulled over, I do the same thing. I put my hands on the steering wheel. I say, license and registration, they tell me. I say, it's in the glove box, may I get it? That is the proper way, because I don't want him to wonder if he's gonna go home to his family tonight. Because his life is flashing through his mind, because he doesn't know what he's gonna find in that car. And really, he just wants to go home at the end of the day and see his family. He's human too. And I feel like police officers have been dehumanized through all this. Their lives matter too. And a lot of this has just gotten lost.
To have a Black Lives Matter movement, it's not just about police. It's not just about police brutality. So let's not make it all about police brutality, because that's not what it's about. It's about, here's a group of people who have been in this country, in this side of the world for 400 years and have been enslaved, okay? And we are crying out.
I want to ask, and I'll start with Marie, Marie and Leanne and Rosemary. I want to ask you, during your lifetime, have you ever experienced racism, or have you ever noticed or seen any evidence of systemic racism?
But I was just thinking, when I lived in the South Pacific and that I was in the minority, and I'm not trying to equate that with anything that has happened to Black people, because there was not the slavery issue and there's so many things that didn't apply. But now and then you would feel this systemic sort of a situation where the South Pacific Islanders would get a leg up on things, and the haole. Anybody been to Hawaii or lived there, especially, not just a tourist, but sometimes you would feel that just a few moments of a sense of frustration. And if you can take those experiences in life and apply them and think, oh my God, if I was frustrated for 5 minutes because somebody passed over me in the correct order for something, perhaps you can use that to understand just an iota of what it must be like to experience that on a daily, weekly, monthly, generationally basis for hundreds of years.
I was stationed in Hawaii for 3 years, and I would have white friends that would say that all the time. Because they call the Hawaiian people or Asian Pacific people call Caucasians haoles. And so they would always come and complain to me about it. Like, can you believe they did this? Can you believe? And I would always just kind of chuckle. This was in the 90s when I was there. And so I would just kind of chuckle to myself and be like, now you see how we feel.
Yeah, so I grew up in the city of Yonkers, which is a very big city, and it's very diverse, very different from north to south. And back when I was in elementary school, the Yonkers Board of Education decided that they were going to desegregate the Yonkers public school system and integrate the students to promote diversity. So I lived on the north side of town. We originally lived on the south side of town, but my parents, Italian immigrants, saved every penny. My mom was a seamstress. My father worked in a factory to move us into a home instead of an apartment so that we had more space. So now I live on the north side of town, and I was bused to the south side of town, all for this promotion of diversity, which is supposed to be a positive thing, right? You would think, teach children when they're young to play together, everything should be good. That's a good concept. But I gotta tell you, and it's not like I harbor any resentment. I didn't carry it with me, but I guess you would call it not racism, but you would call it prejudice. But it was hard. Like the bus, I was bullied on the bus. I was scared on the bus. The schoolyard, it was their turf. The black girls would be like, get up. I was scared. I was green. I was innocent. I was a kid, you know? So yeah, I felt very white. I have to be honest with you. This is how I felt, you know? And my parents were like, why did you have to be subjected to that when we worked so hard? Not because we didn't want to be around black people, but because we just wanted to live in a home. And why couldn't you just go to school up the street? You know, this is what was my experience. But fast forward, working for an airline, I never felt like anybody was different because of the color of their skin. I never had any ill will, or I break bread with people. They're family to me. And I gotta tell you, I've been on a rant on Facebook because I was so angry inside, and I was just so hurt and embarrassed, and I lost sleep over it. Like how angry I got. And everything is lost in translation when you're angry. I know I'm getting off the topic of the question. I'm sorry. This is in my heart, and it hurts. Like, I don't know how to fix this.
Right. So
You know, I want to.
it didn't happen overnight.
No.
And Laura said this has been going on for years. Have you ever seen an example of systemic racism?
So I would say the things that were passed down generationally, even in my family, is where I would say I would experienced it before experiencing it with my friends. Or so, if that makes sense, growing up and hearing one thing basically about interracial dating, or marriage, that was not accepted. But I would go to school and I just wouldn't understand it because I loved my friends. Everything was okay. But in the home, things that were passed down, whether, people really believed it or not, it just was being passed down from, well, great grandparents said this is how it goes. And so I would say systemically, even in family units, that's where it was passed down, and it wasn't broken until Jesus opened my eyes to see. I knew that wasn't right.
And I'm going to pose this question to Laura and Tiffany and Yvette. When someone says to you, I don't see color, what does that mean? I don't see color. And I should say, when a white person says to you, I don't see color, because I'm willing to bet you each of you have had this experience in some form or fashion where you've been told by a white person who thought they were giving you a compliment saying, I don't see color, or I don't consider you black.
I was talking about this with my cousin and sister recently, and I love my cousin's response to this. Whenever someone says that to her, she says, oh, you better get that checked. Because that's not a thing. I don't think we need to negate people's color in order to love and accept them. If you need to not see my color in order to love me and welcome me into your life and heart, then that's a problem. We were created this way in heaven, every tongue, tribe, and nation. So I think we need to embrace who we are. And I think the church is lacking when we leave out people's color and culture, when we all try to assimilate. And I mean, the evangelical church in America is very white. Even multi-ethnic churches, if the leadership is white, they tend to be very white as far as tradition and the order of services, the way things are done. And it's leaving out a lot of culture, which is leaving out a lot of God's creativity and beauty that he put in the whole spectrum of the human race. We're missing out on that when we try not to see someone's color. I don't need you to not see my color.
Yvette.
I'll just say that I think sometimes people don't know what to say and they just want to sympathize with you. So I think too, as Black people too, we can't get so technical and so uptight when people do say that to us, but just explain to them like we're explaining it right now. You know, I know you love me. I know you consider me a friend, but I am Black and it's okay. And it's okay if you see me that way. So I think, sometimes you just have to talk to people too. They mean well. It's not always, everything's not always coming from a bad angle.
Not always intentional. So is it possible then to be prejudiced without knowing it? Marie.
Oh, yeah.
Is it possible to be prejudiced without knowing it?
It's possible to sound prejudiced.
I think that's where the whole heritage issues come in, what's being passed down, and that stuff is so subtle, and it's been for generations on both sides. There's stereotypes, and it starts within families, I believe.
Because in order for healing to begin, in order for us to make change, I think people have to accept the fact that it exists. It's like an alcoholic. You can't change it until you accept that it exists. You can't make change until you accept that there's actually a problem. And so what do we say to those who believe that there isn't a problem, that we've had a Black president? There's no systemic racism. There's no, that's pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and that's their problem. That's not our problem.
I think it's important to be put on the spot and put people on the spot and force them to look inside themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, they could say, oh, no, it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. But then if you speak openly and honestly, and for example, the experiences you told me, like in school, what you went through, who in their right mind would deny that what you're saying is true? If someone turns a blind eye to that and they don't want to admit that that's true, well, then shame on them. And I think they'll be in the minority, because when you have compassion and you want to be treated the way you want people to treat you, the way you treat them, it just seems pretty logical. And maybe we should stop listening to politicians and look within ourselves more, self-analysis, and ask God for help.
In those one-on-one conversations with people and not being afraid. I know sometimes I'm afraid to talk to people because I don't want to offend somebody. But just being brave and just being able to talk openly and getting people to see your side.
So I would say we have to each take a personal step to change and acknowledge all of those subtle prejudices that may have trickled down, and stop those, and then link arms, live together, do life together, and show the world, be the light.
A lot of us appreciate it when our biases, prejudices, or whatever are pointed out to us in a kind and loving way as well. Because I know I'm trying to listen and learn right now, and when it comes from a place of caring, I always appreciate it when somebody points out the potential for prejudice or the actual prejudice that might be in something that I've said or done.
I'm gonna say that I'm not trying to convince anybody that it exists because at this point, it's so obvious. If there's somebody who doesn't believe racism exists, it's because they don't want to believe that it exists. So I have made the decision not to use any more energy to try to convince somebody that it exists. I would rather have meaningful conversations with people who see it and then go, okay, so now what? What's the next step? What do I do about it? Because those who are not willing to engage right now, I mean, our history right now we're at a moment of history where I think we're like at a fork in the road. Things are going to go one way or the other. And for people who don't want to engage, don't want to be a part, that's okay. They may come along later, you know, and we'll say, welcome, glad you know, catch on up. But for right now, I'm just not going to drag anybody or try to guilt anybody into being a part of the solution. I feel like and just lastly, as a believer, why you would be surprised that sin exists, I don't understand. Why you would not be able to believe that there's sin in our hearts, that there was sin in the hearts of our founders, that there's sin in the hearts of our leaders today. Why that would be shocking to you, I do not know why a Christian could feel that way, unless you're just determined to hold on to that false narrative.
Laura.
I'm going to end with, I'm going to take it back again. You know, racism, this country was founded on racism, you know, and so when people say they don't see it, then that's their choice. Me as an individual, I want to be a part of the movement, because if there wasn't a movement, then I wouldn't be sitting here right now. So there was a movement to get us out of slavery. There was a movement for civil rights. So now we're in another movement for equal rights. And so we have to keep moving. We have to be a part of the movement. So if it means marching, you know, then I'm going to march. If it means, you know, talking to folks and trying to get folks to understand, even in a little subtle way, I think the bigger the movement, it's going to open people's eyes. Do I have to be the individual to open their eyes? No, I'm not going to be able to do that. But can I be a part of the movement? Yes, I can.
So I thank you for your time. I thank you for, you know, sharing your experiences, your willingness to be transparent. And it is a hard topic to talk about, but again, talk we must. And I hope that this doesn't stop here.
Thank you, Annette.